Now that you have read through and worked through the first four examples, each of which has leading coefficient of a equal to 1, I want to take a look back. I want to look back at the pair of numbers that we had defined for each one of those examples. Now this pair of numbers came from the fact that the pair had to have a product that was equal to the same thing as a times c, and it had to have a sum that was equal to b when we're talking about a, b, and c being the coefficients of our quadratic. And so this pair of numbers that we had for number 1 was 3 and 4. And that pair of numbers, after we did factoring by grouping, led to the factored form x plus 3 times x plus 4. Now we see that the 3 and the 4 in the pair of numbers did come into play here in the factored form, but let's go ahead and look at the other 3 examples as well, because those other 3 examples were dealing with, some of them were dealing with negatives, and so we want to make sure to have an assessment of what's going on with signs and not just the number itself. And so for our second example, we had the pair of numbers -3 and +6, and that led to the factored form x minus 3 and x plus 6 as the two factors. And so now we are beginning to see this pattern even more strongly. If the sign happens to be negative with the number, the subtraction comes into play in that corresponding factor for the factored form. So let's continue to make sure this makes sense. For our third example, we had the pair of numbers -1 and -7. So now our hypothesis would be that we'd have subtraction in both of those factors based on the two negatives that we have in the pair of numbers. And that's exactly what we had. We had x minus 1 times x minus 7. And so just to drive home the point, our final combination of signs here is when we had a +3 and a -9. And that led to the factored form x plus 3 times x minus 9. And so we have seen here, as we've looked back, that really as soon as we know the pair of numbers that does what we need it to do, that multiplies to give us a times c and adds to give us b, as soon as we know that pair of numbers, we could write down the factored form without any additional work. We didn't have to do all of the splitting the middle term, factoring by grouping, but this hinges on one very important piece of information that we can't forget. So here in our conclusion, I'm going to have that very important piece of information listed at the very beginning. If a is equal to 1. Now this is super critical here. All 4 of these examples had leading coefficient a equal to 1. And so we can say if a is equal to 1, knowing the two numbers, allows you to write down the factorization. So knowing the two numbers allows you to write down the factorization with no more work, and that's the nice part. But don't forget that a equal to 1 is something that has to happen if you're going to utilize this shortcut.